Marco,
Sean, how is
yes,
your appetite today?
I'm hungry for some risk. I
Do
love
you
I
do?
love chewing on risk.
Is that on the menu in New York?
It
Now
is
you
on the
go in New
menu.
York City, they go to the restaurant, like you can have an appetizer or you can
That's
have
right.
some risk.
I stay away from the deep dish risk. Yeah, I prefer the traditional New York style risk.
All right, all right. It's a new time, new topics, new food, new everything. Everything is new nowadays, Sean.
Everything is new. Everything is new,
But
and
risk is not new. Can I say that?
risk. I think. Yeah, I think as soon as humans entered the picture, we had risk, right?
For sure. As
Sure.
we move, there is risk.
I think what's changed though is the amount and the scale with which we have to evaluate all that risk, especially with all things tech these days. And of course, that's on a personal level, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about that from an enterprise level. And to run a business is risky, right? We all take a chance to create something new we think people will like, and there's stuff that gets in the way. And better we are at handling that and mitigating that, the more likely we are to succeed and delight our customers and investors and shareholders and everybody else. So I'm excited to talk about this, Marco. You know I'm a nerd. I like to talk about
I
risk.
know that.
Yes,
That's
and
not new.
we're going to do that with Megha Kumar from CyXcel. Megha, how are you?
I'm very well, Sean and Marco. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's our
Yeah.
pleasure. Our pleasure to have you on. Excited to dig into this topic. I have a feeling you're as passionate about it as I am. I've seen some of the stuff you've been doing with the team, and it's really cool. So before we get into the topic at hand, maybe a few words about some of the things you've been doing and in the industry at large, and then perhaps a few points from your role at CyXcel as well.
Sure, yeah. So I serve as Chief Product Officer and Head of Geopolitical Risk at CyXcel. We are a boardroom to courtroom consultancy in the United Kingdom, specifically, while we serve other markets as well through our legal partners. Essentially, what we want to do is to enable companies to take an enterprise business led view on digital resilience so that they can use their technology more effectively, adopt new technologies such as AI more confidently, but not without having a handle on the risk that economic efficiency or increased productivity necessarily entails. Before I joined CyXcel last year, I was Deputy Director for Technology and Cybersecurity at the Geopolitical Risk Consultancy Oxford Analytica, where I advised Fortune 500 companies, international multilateral organizations such as the UN, and all major governments across the world on all things cyber and tech. So I've been around the block.
You've definitely been around the block. And, one thing we didn't mention at the beginning, I look at things from the societal perspective in terms of technology and society. So, well, Sean is the cyber security guy. The truth is that we're all in a hybrid world, and there are things now in cybersecurity that years ago we didn't think about, like geopolitical things and situation and global markets. And we've seen it during the pandemic. We see it every day. Something happened, somebody sneezes somewhere, you get a cold somewhere else. So a lot of things in the picture. And I think what I really would like to start with is it's the understanding, right? We made a lot of jokes about the appetite and the risk, but really it's about understanding the risk and move with the business with whatever you're doing, knowing that there's always going to be risk. Does it make sense what I
Yes,
just said?
absolutely. Yeah. So, the at CyXcel, we deliberately wanted to forge a new path because what we've seen in the industry over the last 15, 20 years is excellent work being done on hardware, software, or services. There are companies that specialize in incident response or digital transformation. There are entities that respond that specialize in all things regulation and law, whether it affects a post-incident or pre-incident situation. We wanted to break that mold because, frankly, from the purposes of a client we are serving, a community that we are part of, they don't care about these neat boundaries. And we wanted to cross those. We wanted to enable clients to understand three key components. And I think sometimes the complexity can be overwhelming. And I think it's quite unnecessary. I see the world as pretty simple. In order to operate effectively in the digital economy, and we are all part of the digital economy as citizens, as individuals, families, as members of community, citizens, whatever, we need to understand and comply with the rules and regulations, whether they be about who we can procure services from, who we can sell or buy from, who we can serve, do business with, and not. So the rules. The second is that we have to get a handle on the infrastructure we use. What is exactly the hardware that we are dependent on, whether it is laptops or servers, whether it is software services that we might buy from companies such as Microsoft or whoever else, or the services that we are dependent on, whether it be a cloud provider or a specialist agency that serves our IT or payroll or whatever. The third thing, besides rules and infrastructure, is the threats. And those threats can come in many fashions. As you rightly pointed out, Marco, earlier, geopolitics is one of the threats that companies only in select sectors such as oil and energy took very seriously for the longest time. Now that has changed. The threats also come from criminal actors that operate across boundaries and without shame. And the threats can also come from new technologies such as AI, which can be huge boons in terms of economic efficiency, finding new markets, getting things done faster, perhaps better. But there are all kinds of misuses that any technology can be put to. No technology in the 5,000 years of building technology has been risk free. Every technology is dual use. So then the question becomes, how do we, as services providers, as responsible business people, serve clients to understand the rules, the infrastructure, and the threats so that they can be confident that they are leveraging the tools that are available to them for good and doing everything that is possible to minimize the risk that inevitably follows.
So, talk to me a bit about some of the signals that organizations might have, either in their data or in the news or from their peers. I know a lot of executives join groups where they get to talk to each other, right? And certainly the board members do as well. So, what are some of the signals that they should be looking for, perhaps that are under the radar, maybe less obvious? That kind of points to you might be missing a few things with respect to risk.
Yeah. In order to know what constitutes a signal and what constitutes noise, you have to have an understanding of who you are. There are all kinds of things happening in the world, but that doesn't mean that everything that's happening in the world is important or relevant to my organization. So, in order to know what to hear and to ignore, you have to know who it is that you are. And that involves, for a company, understanding what kind of markets you operate in. And when I say markets you operate in, that includes where your people are in terms of staff and contracted employees, where your supply chain is, how many jurisdictions does it cross, where your consumers are, because those two may not be the same thing. You have to understand whether, for example, you are now within scope of some of the new legislation we have had, whether it's DORA in the EU, whether it's NIS2, whether you are an entity that is considered critical national infrastructure, and therefore your regulatory responsibilities are obviously going to be more intense. You have to understand whether there are some tripwires that you have to navigate simply because you're operating in contested jurisdictions, whether it's in parts of the Middle East, whether it's in part of Central Eastern Europe, whether it's elsewhere in Asia. Once you have an understanding of where you are, who you are, you have to then ask, where are you trying to go? What is your business goal? Is it to expand certain markets? Is it to have cost efficiency? Is it to embrace new technology? Then you can follow what the milestones for you might be. So if you are a company that, for example, crosses borders in terms of your people, your supply chain, or your markets, you cannot ignore geopolitical signals because the world is fraught, it is deeply interconnected, and there is no easy path to reshoring or nearshoring, which means that you can't bring all your business back home, which means you must cross borders, which in turn means that not only do you have to know what the regulatory tripwires are, because rules do dramatically differ from country to country, you also have to know what the geopolitical landscape is between those two markets. And you have to find the path that for your business and for your internal stakeholders, your staff, your board, and your markets is the right pitch. Equally, supply chain. Now, a lot of companies over the last 10, 15 years, because we've seen a secular increase in supply chain decoupling. Companies have tried to consolidate it, and that's been because, in 2011, we had the Fukushima disaster in Japan, and that led to a lot of reckoning that if you're so exposed to the auto industry in Japan, that's not a risk that you want on your balance sheet, or climate change or related disasters that we've had across parts of Southeast Asia, which are huge hubs for inputs for largest companies in the world, or parts of Latin America. What you have to now understand your supply chain, not just at the top tier level, who are your top 5 critical suppliers. You have to try and understand your supply chain as deeply as possible. Who are your second degree suppliers and your third degree suppliers? And, as much as possible, you should go down as deeply as you can so that you can clearly identify who your critical suppliers are. Who can you absolutely not do without? And then would you put all your eggs in one basket? You wouldn't. And if you have, then you need to take proportionate mitigation measures because that is your golden goose. Mixing metaphors here, but you get the point. The second point is about the ongoing diligence. A lot of companies will do supply chain diligence when they start a contract, when they bring someone new on board. But supply chain has to be an ongoing exercise when it comes to vigilance. It takes time, and it takes money, it takes resources. But a contractor that you signed a contract with 5 years ago may not be the same entity that you're working with now. They may have adopted new technology that you are unaware of. They may have plugged in new forms of AI, which is accidentally bleeding your data, for example. Or they may have, over the years, become embroiled in practices that you don't want to be linked with as a company. So that ongoing diligence is very important. And that's where your signals lie. If you know who your top suppliers are and your second and third tier, you can then monitor them for relevance. Ultimately, Sean, Marco, the point is this: all kinds of things are happening in the world. My job as a business owner is to know and effectively manage everything that affects me.
Now, let me, because some people may listen to this, like me, and be like, I'm not going anywhere. It's too risky. I mean, the world is complicated, way more complicated than what it was before. And probably better for certain things. Well, that's a philosophical conversation. What I'm thinking right now is people listening is what size, what level of maturity, what moment in the company life you realize that you need the service that you're offering. At what point, so it's not too late, or it's too expensive, or you have to change everything and reverse what you've done? What is the sweet spot where you can work with somebody like your company?
The sweet spot is obvious if you think about it, and everybody can know it instantly. Whether you are a very new startup, you're a scale up, or you're a mid-sized company, or you're a large corporate, or you are a multi-country MNC with hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue and hundreds of thousands of people. The amount of attention, resource, and effort you invest in risk management has to be proportionate to the value of the underlying asset, which in simple terms means, why would I want to spend $100 protecting an asset that is worth $1? Right? It's very simple. You wouldn't do that.
No.
But a small company, a startup, may not be worth very much in terms of balance sheet because it's a growing entity, but it may have developed technology that is potentially worth billions of dollars, has IP that is both sensitive to its host country, and the company is mindful that this is not the kind of technology you want having getting misused. So just because the number on the paper on your P&L is very low does not therefore mean that the value of the underlying asset is low. Equally, very large companies manage to operate almost entirely within their own jurisdiction, or primarily in the countries that are friendly to their host nation. So, for example, if you take China, there are thousands and thousands of companies that never have to, nor they wish to, venture outside of China because it's a huge domestic market. Why would you want to go outside? You don't need to. The same can be true, obviously, for the United States. It can be true for large emerging markets such as India and Brazil. It can be true for South Africa. It can be true for Indonesia. So if your reliance on external countries is very low, then you can possibly discount some of the cross-border challenges that might arise because of regulatory shifts, because of geopolitics, because of possibly supply chain. Even in those cases, however, if your business would not survive or would take a serious hit in the event of a cyber breach, then you know that you have to do something about risk mitigation. So at CyXcel, we work with really small companies. Some are nonprofits with whom we work on a pro bono basis. And we also serve some of the largest companies on the planet. The basic message is the same, that all companies are now technology companies. If you are a company that goes nowhere near the internet, then I will very happily never cloud your door. You are not in need of the services that companies such as CyXcel provide. If, however, you go anywhere near the internet and are dependent on a computer to do your work, then you have to take cyber resilience and digital risk very seriously.
So help me with this, Megha, because I think the general idea of risk management, as you described it, is pretty straightforward. But when we start getting into the actual activities of it, there's well, to your point, who are you, right? And you're made up of, you are what you eat, right? So what systems and services and partners do you work with, and what products are you building, customers do you interact with, where are you doing that? Getting getting that inventory, getting that understanding is one thing. Understanding the risks and the threats and the regulatory piece is another thing. Um, Turning all of that into data and numbers so you can do some math is another thing. And then there's the storytelling part, right? So how do you convince somebody that it isn't just a number at the end of the P&L, but here's the story that says this is why we need to make this investment to protect this thing that connects to all this other stuff because of these risks. So talk to me a little bit about how you help organizations take those steps. There are probably others that I'm not even listing here, but take kind of that analysis, math, storytelling to get it all in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, let me tell you the story that I told a client. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it. They seem to. It, a lot of people don't understand how supply chain, geopolitics, laws, regulations, threats are interconnected, right? And I can throw at you a gazillion terabytes of data, but still not land, still not move you into doing something. But here is a simple story, imagined as a fable. Try this out for size. Imagine the world is made up of a kingdom led by one dragon and one eagle. Both sides want to dominate space, earth, and undersea. In order to win over each other, they want to have the best space technology so that they rule what comes out of that part of the universe. They decide what the rules of the games are on planet Earth, who can be friends with whom, who can buy what from whom, who invests in what, who sells what. And they want to be masters of the ocean because that is where all the undersea cables lie, which are the lifeblood, the infrastructure of the modern digital economy. Electricity and data passes through that. In order for the dragon and the eagle to develop supremacy, unmatched supremacy over this whole universe, they decided to divide up the world into friends and foes. You're in my camp or you're against me. There are friends you can do business with, and there are friends you can't do business with. There are things that they would do in order to sabotage each other, undercut each other in competition, keep each other out of their economies through rules and regulations. And where appropriate, the hostile actor would also attack the eagle and its friends. You might think it is a fable, but at a very simplified level, that is the world we are in today, where eagle represents the US-led ecosystem and the dragon represents the China-led ecosystem. There are commonalities, but they are fewer than things that divide them. And no matter who you are as a company, you are living in this ecosystem, this universe where one side cannot see eye to eye with another. I wish there was another universe where you could kind of be non-aligned and apolitical and unconcerned, and you could go about your merry business. That is just not the way it works. And this is an inheritance of the last 20 years, or indeed longer, of globalization, where we have partnered with, started doing business with, working with, hiring people from all parts of the world. And that's been a great economic asset. It's better for economic efficiency. It's better for talent management. It is better for sort of de-risking when you have a global network. But it comes with its risks. And this is the world we have created. And now it's more and more hostile to each other. And you have no choice but to work within this system, but do it smartly.
I was wondering why you put the dragon and the eagle at the beginning, because I write stories that are all weird. So I was like, why the dragon and the eagle? And why not aliens and something else? Now you made the point, because you're talking about two specific countries. So here's my thinking, looking at politics. Obviously, you can look back and maybe the two big players could have been, Russia and the United States during the Cold War. There's always, let's put it this way, there's always some faction, East and West, or, North and South, whatever it is. We're always in battle with each other. And politics do change. And so how do you make into place, how do you make into play the changes that could come? Because that's when you put your futuristic prediction hat and you have to kind of roll the dice with as much knowledge as you can. But again, there is no certainty. So how do you even advise when you get to this very intangible prediction?
Yes.
You can say the computer power is going to be this, and there are certain technology will develop this way, but politics, they change really fast.
Yes, and one of the things that has happened, which is quite noticeable over the course of the 15 years that I've been doing geopolitical risk, is that 15 years ago, when a company asked me to do a long-term scenario analysis for them, they meant 10 years. And when they said medium term, they meant 5 years.
Yeah.
And when they said short term, they meant 1 to 2 years. Now, when somebody asks me to do the same, with short term, they mean 1 quarter. With medium term, they mean 2 quarters. And with long term, they mean 4 quarters. Now, I can see how the pace of political disruption has changed. And there are certain things that we can now project into the future with a degree of confidence. And that is ultimately where risk analysis comes into play. You can project on the trends that you see going on. And when you assign a confidence rating to it, that acts as a checks and balance. With regard to the trends that we see continuing, the following are important. One, The next 5 years at least, and I can explain why I'm going only sort of to the next 5 years. Over the next 5 years, AI related technological disruption will be one of the key theaters of geopolitical conflict. Not just in terms of who has the best kit and who makes the most sophisticated AI model, or who inches closer to the race towards super intelligence, or some kind of a machine that basically makes us all irrelevant. The challenge will also be in terms of who buys whose technology. How deeply does that technology get embedded? Because it is much easier to embed a technology than it is to rip it out. So a lot of the market of AI technology will change the geopolitics of the world, and commerce and geopolitics will mutually reinforce each other. The other trend that we have seen over the last few years, but it will continue well into the future, is that politics is no longer just something that happens to a company or something that is external, an exogenous factor that a company has to manage. We've seen since Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Israel Palestine, Russia Ukraine, that companies at the senior level can no longer ignore what their Gen Z or millennial staff think about the business model. Given the pace with which social media now connects people to information, both good and bad, both true and false, that politics is now almost in the living, breathing fabric of a company in its daily operations, which means that you have to manage what goes on in your Slack channel and Teams channel, and what are the kinds of policies or missions or politics a company gets behind or does not get behind in public. And also, I think given national politics has become so polarized in so many jurisdictions, and there's no end to sight in that, on that, what kind of a relationship a company maintains to that polarized host government also matters. So geopolitics is not just something that's happening outside your jurisdiction. It is here. Back in the day, about 20, 30 years ago, when I trained as an historian, we would often joke that the East has no economy and the West has no politics. That is no longer the case, which means that the calm that Western policymakers have experienced over the last 25 years, that moment is now gone.
It's so interesting to see all this evolution, of course, and maybe it's not an evolution, but a cycle, right? Perhaps it repeats many times. One of the things I get to talk to a lot of people on my show, and one of the things I often hear, certainly I've heard over the last few months or so, is and it's not a new concept, but sovereignty has become an important part of the discussion, and being resilient in your own ecosystem, nation, or within whatever world you're operating in. And so for me, that brings up the question: how do we bring back all of this stuff to say, not just because I know risk management is to allow for growth and innovation in a safe way, but perhaps it means also maybe we take a step back and look at, well, how did we do this? To your point, it's easy to embed, hard to rip and replace something. How do we make the best decision now to deal with what we're dealing with now, but to prepare us for maybe changes that might be coming, like this move to bring everything back into the local country, or perhaps we relied on a cloud service provider that's in a different country before. I'm just bringing that as an example. So some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, fundamentally, there are only four things you can do with risk. You can choose to altogether avoid a risk, not do business in a particular market, not to do business in a particular country, not to do business in a certain vertical. You can choose to avoid that risk. The second thing you can do is actively mitigate that risk. And that goes back to the point I made earlier. The mitigation effort has to be proportionate to the value of the underlying asset. So what you think you should mitigate, you mitigate. The third thing you can do with risk is transfer risk. which is where, for example, things like warranties or insurance comes in handy, where you don't want it sitting on your books. You transfer some of the risk. Should the worst happen, it's a rainy day check. And the fourth thing that you can do is tolerate a risk, where you think, well, it's just the cost of doing business. And we have enough financial reserves or supply chain resilience or market loyalty, whatever it is, to be able to swallow that risk. And with regard to any sort of scenario analysis, which I strongly recommend every company does, regardless of where you are in your business journey or resilience journey, you take those four aspects. You want to mitigate, transfer, accept, or tolerate that risk. And then you ask yourself, well, what are your business goals over the next 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year? I know it is not very fashionable to plan for the longer term, but actually, this is precisely the time to plan for the longer term, because a lot of the efficiencies that you can find in risk mitigation today will bear fruit in the longer term. Nobody wants to think about the longer term, but it's important. Once you sort of break the puzzle of the world into these smaller, identifiable, trackable bits, then you can decide, okay, well, we are going to invest this much resource in insurance and this much in risk mitigation. These are the kinds of risks we simply don't want to take. And these are the risks that we are willing to tolerate. And then periodically revise that so that if your appetite changes or your business condition changes or the external world changes, you can calibrate. It is impossible for anybody to build a new castle every single day, every single quarter. It simply doesn't happen that way. What you can, however, do is to make tweaks to your existing infrastructure. And the farther away you can see them coming, the easier it will be to manage. And if you can't manage that, well, call us and we'll help you.
All right, let's get to that, because I'm gonna go to two main thing here is change. You need to deal with that, and as you say, change now, it's not 10 years plan, it's quarter plan.
You saying I have to start liking deep dish risk pizza here in New York? Is that what you're telling me, Marco?
Yeah, it's a la carte at this point. So there is that, there's change, and you got to deal with it. And then the fact is that I am grasping from this conversation is that you just can't assume anything. You need to be lively checking constantly what's going on. And of course, if you're going to do it by yourself, you need a department just for that, the Department of Digital Risk Management. Well, you can do that for the company. So can you tell me and the audience, and Sean, because it's curious too, how does it work? How does somebody start working with you guys, and how does working with you works like?
Yeah, Marco, that's a great question. And I want to go back to one of the points you just made, which is that, to manage risk, you need a whole department. The problem doesn't end there. When large companies have huge departments, they are not necessarily better at managing risk. It's just too many cooks. So then you're caught between a hard place where you have no cooks or too many. Either way, it can lead to paralysis and poor decision making. And the related point is that because the risk come in at different speeds, and there are different kinds of risks. Some are geopolitical, some are technology related, and some are legal and regulatory. These are very different types of expertise that you need in order to get a whole picture. But a company doesn't operate in a silo. So if there is a new regulatory change, it's not just the legal department or the head of legal that's going to be affected, it's the whole company. So we wanted to solve that challenge, partly because we believe in bringing this multidisciplinarity to bear when it comes to a client solution. But also, I was deeply disappointed with everything that I saw in the market, because everybody agrees that the world is interconnected, but our solutions are very isolated, all one-trick ponies, and which makes no sense to me. We created a subscription access SaaS platform called the Digital Risk Management Platform. We launched it in June this year, where we bring together 7 different categories of risk, most of which we have talked about in passing so far. And we wanted to make sure that the output of that tool is processable, accessible to anybody, regardless of where they are in their digital resilience journey. A very large company can use it for systematic risk analysis. A very small company can use it. We can assume that a company has at least one person who's responsible for IT. That is the basic that most companies now have. We wanted to be able to empower the leadership of an organization, whether it's 2 people, 10 people, or 200, doesn't matter. Enable the leadership of a company to get a holistic view of all the digital risks that affect them so that they have a one-page view on where they are in relation to different risks. It is not always the case that all risks rise at the same time, at the same speed every day. They don't. Some risks ebb and flow. Some risks rise more slowly than others. Some risks are more volatile. When they happen very fast. We wanted to take all this complexity out of the picture so that a company can know, A, what is happening in the outside world that could affect me? B, to what extent am I, as a particular company in a particular sector, exposed to these risks? Like I said earlier, just because something's happening in the world doesn't mean it's going to affect me. So I need to know what my exposure is to those risks. And then evaluate what are the controls, mitigations I have in place that protect me? And are those controls proportionate to the risk I'm taking? Literally, in a 30-minute exercise that we run with boards and C-suite, a company can get a very real, tangible sense of their inherent risk and their residual risk. And the goal is very simple. Try and move from where your risk categories are red to amber to green. And if you find that certain categories, such as supply chain or cyber, are flashing red, but your corporate responsibility and geopolitics are in green, it would make sense that you prioritize what is red, what is more risky than others. So you can plan your budget, you can resource more mindfully, and you can be confident that you haven't lost any piece of the puzzle. So every stakeholder has a chance to have their risks, their concerns reflected at the top table.
And Megha, as we wrap here, I want to, not that you haven't shared a lot that's in your head today, but I want to really get inside your mind, because you've advised hundreds of organizations, small and large, governments, institutions around the world, and I believe managing risk is a way of thinking as well, which then it's not just an individual, your way of thinking, but a team's way of thinking. So what that means, culture. So how do you help organizations kind of free their bias, if you will, to open up to new ways of thinking, and then to collectively perhaps shift the culture to change the way the organization thinks about risk?
Yeah, if you start from the internal to the external, internally, a lot of companies, especially those that are more mature, so have, a substantial staff and revenue, they're composed of different demographics of people, right? And, new entrants and mid-managers and senior folk. There has to be a culture that encourages a flat intellectual hierarchy. And I think that is key to risk management. There's an old poem from, I think, a Roman or Greek poet, which shows that, the hedgehog knows one thing and the fox knows many things. Companies have to cultivate that culture of being a fox. And that means that you have to entertain and consider seriously the views of a non-expert. Actually, evidence shows that non-experts are better at risk prediction than most experts. They just see a little narrow hole like hedgehogs. They need to broaden it out, which means that internally companies should see internal opposition, dissent, criticism, and feedback as an asset, because your staff from different demographics, different parts of the world, different educational backgrounds, different skill set are seeing things that you are not seeing. That doesn't mean everything is equally valuable, but if you've never heard it, you will never know. The second point is about sort of looking beyond your own company to what your peers in your jurisdiction or across sectors are doing. There are certain things that companies have to do because they are part of a heavily regulated sector. So in some respects, a very regulated bank will be very similar to another bank, or a pharma company will be in many ways very similar to another pharma company, because those are the rules they all have to abide by. But good practice, whether it's on risk management, talent management, and listening to your people, all stakeholders, that good practice can be anywhere. And the only way a company can grow is by seeking out that good practice. Like, if you're a pharma company, what is a bank doing that could be actually a very good idea when it comes to, say, AI adoption, or digital risk management, or what corporate responsibility looks like, or what DEI practice looks like in this very fraught world? Similarly, companies are welcome to partner with companies such as ours, where we bring that fresh perspective. In many cases, that external digital assurance is part of your regulatory or compliance obligation. You can't mark your own homework. At some point, you have to get an external auditor in to see that everything is fine. So in simple financial terms, your accountant manages all the books, but periodically those books have to get audited externally by an independent partial party. The same is true for digital operations. Every now and then, you have to engage intellectually with what is happening in the digital world, if that is the core concern that you have, to understand, are there better ways of doing things? Are there better ways of managing risk, of optimizing what you can and cannot do, optimizing what your near-term strategy looks like in relation to where you might want to go in 5 to 10 years? So this is a rather meandering answer to your very crisp question, Sean. But I suppose what I'm saying is, a company has to be willing to listen properly to people that are their own, to their peers in the market, and to external people who spend an awful lot of time thinking about these things, like me.
Well said, a lot said, and a lot certainly for people to think about and chew on here, whether they like deep dish or traditional New York style risk management. That's the cool thing, right? It's you have to determine what's appropriate for your business, the way you operate and who you operate with. And if you're having a hard time starting, if you're having a hard time managing, if you're having a difficult time being effective and efficient in your risk management program, I'm going to say Megha's the perfect person to connect with and have a chat with. Think differently, think openly, embrace what you know, embrace what you hear, and use the data and information you have. Don't get bogged down if you're lacking information and get stuck and paralyzed. And either way, too little or too much info. Megha, it's a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights and nerding out with me a bit on risk management here and the CyXcel DRM platform.
Thank you so much. No, it's been great fun. These nerdy conversations are the highlights of my day. So thank you, Marco. Thank you, Sean.
Really enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.